Hey class, thanks for jumping in on this online lecture, Styles of Conflict Management. A couple things I want you to know on the front end of this particular lecture. One is it uh, it's clear that, at least from my vantage point, that there's a lot of folks who have gone through life, maybe even in the advanced stages of adulthood like me, age 57, where they don't really know who they are. They're not sure why they respond the way they do when they're in conflict. Uh, Bottom line is they have very little self-awareness. So one of the things that I press into, not only as a mediator but as a therapist and even as an educator, is self-awareness. I really do believe that each of us needs to know how we're wired. What are the things that make us angry? What are the things we choose to be angry about? What are the things that we can let go? When the Apostle Paul, wrote to young Timothy, he encouraged him to pay close attention to himself and to his teaching. This is just my way of saying sometimes we don't pay close enough attention to ourselves and to realize exactly what's going on when we're in conflict, or why did this evoke such a response, or why does this person create such feelings inside of us. So all of that to say, I'm assuming by the time you listen to this lecture that you will have already taken the conflict inventory that I gave you, the online inventory. And I want you also to know that there's various styles that are given in this inventory. This doesn't necessarily mark who you are. In other words, one of the things that I want to be really clear with all of you about is I don't like to label people. I don't like to diagnose people. And quite frankly, I don't. Even in being in the mental health industry, I have chosen not to assign a diagnostic label to people. I've chosen, for instance, not to be necessarily involved in assigning diagnostic labels to anybody. You see, what I've discovered down through the years is people have a tendency to live up to their diagnostic labels. In other words, if you walk away from this particular inventory, as modest as it may be, and say, oh, I'm an accommodator, you're going to have a tendency to live up to that. And much like people have a tendency to live up to the mental health diagnoses that somebody gives them, I do believe also that it's kind of a dangerous thing to just assign a label to somebody, say, oh, I'm an avoider, or you're a forcer. So that's not what this is about. This is about pressing into your own life and saying, when push comes to shove, and I hope it doesn't come to that, or when I'm in conflict with somebody, I have a tendency to avoid, or I have a tendency to force, then by all means, this is your opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to put myself on a better growth curve. I'm going to really press in to some of the downsides of these styles. So for the next few moments, we're going to talk about collaborating, compromising, accommodating, avoiding, forcing. I suppose collaboration could be and is the most mature of all the styles. I'll grant you that. People who are collaborators have a tendency to be a bit more emotionally mature. They are really okay in this conflict if both people win in this situation. And, or as Michael Scott says in an episode of The Office on conflict management where it's a win-win-win situation. Bottom line is collaboration really is a good gig, you guys. It's designed by its very nature to approach problem solving in a very mature way. The beauty of this particular style is that it gives you the freedom to be very clear about where you stand on this particular issue, whatever the issue may be. But you have the maturity in you to also to not interrupt and to not get panicky and nervous about, am I going to get a chance to state my view? You assert your views while also inviting other views. And what this is marked by, and I hear this a lot from people who are really good collaborators, and that is, Dan, I'm not saying I agree with you, but tell me more. Or I'm not saying that by listening to you right now, I'm agreeing with you. I just value this relationship enough to listen to what you have to say. So anyway, that's collaboration. I know that sounds a little cheesy, but quite frankly, that is what collaborators do. And they use that kind of language like, tell me more. Or I'm not saying I agree with you, but I do respect you enough to hear where your heart is on these issues. And interestingly enough, the perspective on conflict of a collaborator, one who collaborates most of the time, is that conflict, I mean, it's no big whoop. You don't necessarily welcome it. You don't like it. You'd rather be doing something else other than being in conflict with somebody else. But you've filed it away as just being normal, as a normal part of being in relationship with other people. Now, I have sufficiently offended a number of folks from the fair state of Minnesota with my observations regarding Minnesota Nice, and let me just say it on the outset here. I'm just amazed at how, having lived in different parts of the United States, how in this part of the United States, conflict is seen as something really, really bad, and it must be there's something really, really wrong. Actually, not so much. Whether you want to call it Minnesota Nice or whether you want to call it a high grade of avoidance, you call it whatever you want. It's just I have noticed in this part of the country, it's a little more difficult to get people to sign on to the fact that, conflict is just part of the gig called life. And if you're drawing breath and if you're taking in air like most of us, you're going to be in conflict. And the fact that you're in conflict doesn't mean something's wrong. It just means something probably needs to be addressed. Collaborating is good when you have the time to work out something that satisfies everybody involved. And between you and me, it does take a while. It takes a lot of collaboration to reach an agreement, if you would, where everybody is pleased, which some people would consider to be a minor miracle, but I don't. I've seen collaboration work up against the backdrop of mutual respect, and it really does work. And speaking of mutual respect, what's interesting about collaboration is you really do care about the other person, but you also still feel strongly about the issue. You really do feel for that other person. You're able to identify with that person, but you've also, you've got some stakes in this particular issue, and you're not going to just avoid it. You're going to have a voice. And also, collaboration is good when you want to get all the feelings out and deal with them later so they don't come back later to bite you. In other words, what makes collaboration really a good strategy is because nobody's in any hurry. It allows you to get everything out on the table so that you don't hear that dreaded, I didn't know you felt about that, 6 months down the road. It's not good when you don't care that much about the issue and you need to do something rather quickly. In my work as a therapist, for instance, there's been a number of situations where quite frankly, I needed to call 911 or I needed to call the sheriff. When you get a response on your emergency pager service, like if you don't get over here pretty soon, I'm going to take care of this myself. Threats to harm somebody else, all that stuff. I've had a number of those down through the years. That's not the time for me to shift into this little PowerPoint that says, "Hey, let's collaborate." No, there's times, folks, where you just need to do something, and somebody needs to make a decision. But collaborating is not good when you don't care that much about the issue and you really do need to do something quickly. Compromising at times gets some good airtime, but in the years that I've been a mediator, in the years I've been a therapist, I'm not convinced it's the best way to go. I mean, it's okay, and I'll explain that in just a moment. But compromising is just described as let's just meet halfway on this. Let's figure out a way that we can still kind of like each other, but let's just split the difference. I am friends with an attorney and friends with a couple of attorneys, and I don't even like attorneys, but they've told me that just getting people in the midst of, say, a divorce or any sort of settlement to compromise is a mark of strength, not just for their practice, but is a mark of strength for that relationship. The willingness to meet somebody halfway and say, okay, I guess it's not that big of a deal. Typically, compromisers, good moderation, good bargaining tools, and the perspective on conflict for the compromiser is it is normal. So we're still staying within that not freaking out mode, but let's just cooperate and figure out this bad boy. There's less conversation in compromising. Typically, in compromising kinds of scenarios, you don't have as much time. Well, actually, I take that back. You do. I've noticed that a lot of people who settle their differences sometimes do it too quickly. When if they'd have just thought it through a little bit more, there might have been a better resolution against. And compromising is good when you do need a quick solution and you're both willing to give up something, and you both want exactly the same thing, and it can be divided or shared. Let me give you an example of this for just a moment. Though I don't do this on a legal type of venue, I do periodically meet with couples who are divorcing, and they're divorcing for a whole host of reasons that may or may not fit why people should get divorced, but either way they're doing that. And it's interesting how on the front end people will say that they want this for their children, or they want this for their spouse that they're about to divorce. And okay, it looks good, but sometimes I have to peel back the curtain and look at the motives, and come to find out they don't want the same thing. They actually are using that compromising venue, that mediation venue, to kind of stick it to the other person. So a lot of times, whether it's manipulation or not, I'll just say straight up to this couple, I know you both want the same thing. I know you both want healthy children. I know you both want to walk away from this situation with minimal amount of soul damage and bitterness. So let's talk. Before you go see the attorney and pay the retainer, and before you go and get all geeked up about what's yours and what's theirs, let's just see if there's a better way. So compromising is good when you both want exactly the same thing, like healthy children up against some circumstances that really are difficult. It's not good when you might have time to work out a little bit better, more mature solution. I've talked with individuals who, for lack of a better description, have just compromised too quickly. And I'll be honest, I don't like living with that tension any more than you do. I don't like unresolved differences with the people that I'm in significant relationship with. But a lot of times, I personally just have to dial it back and say, okay, I'd like to really finish this conflict as quickly as I can. But it seems like finishing it too quickly would absolve me of some responsibility of taking ownership of certain areas of my life. It would be just too quick of a solution. And a lot of times, compromising is just not good when you have time to work a little longer to find a. For those of you who scored, if you would, a little high on the accommodating piece, again, that doesn't mean you're just this pathological accommodator, people pleaser, if you would. But here's my word to you. Please be willing to take a look at that, because what's happened is you've kind of described conflict, maybe not all conflicts, but most conflicts as, I really don't care that much. But here's the kicker. You probably do care about whatever is out on the table. And so my challenge to you is this. Please at least be willing to consider that if you're high in real life on the whole accommodating, avoiding type of deal, that there might be a measure of people pleasing in you that needs a little bit of work. Let me give you a personal example. A number of years ago, actually back when I was a pastor, my wife presented an interesting question to me one time. She just says, I've noticed that you're pretty angry at times. And she was real clear with me. She says, sometimes that scares me. You seem to be on edge, and not that you would hurt me, but it just kind of frightened her a little bit. Well, that wasn't the best news I've heard, and yet as I looked at that, I realized that there was just a lot of people pleasing in me. I was tired and, quite frankly, a little bit pissed off of trying to just meet everybody's expectations. And I found it fascinating when going through the scriptures. There's a portion in the book of Galatians where Paul said to the Galatians, if I'm trying to be a pleaser of people, I cannot be a pleaser of Christ. Interesting. I had read that passage over and over again before, Why it didn't get some traction in my spirit before, I don't know, but it sure did then, because I realized that's it. I'm spending way too much time accommodating people, trying to maybe get them to like me or hoping that they do. Now, between you and me, I'll confess to you that the pendulum has swung a little bit too far the other way, and that is, if people don't like me, that's okay. I really do okay with that. But I'm just being real clear. Accommodating, you will say you don't care that much anyway, but you probably do, and by saying that, you might be doing an inordinate amount of people pleasing. You let the other person's view prevail, and your perspective on conflict is that it almost always sucks, so I'm just going to go for peace at any price. But let me warn you that peace at any price, first of all, it's not the deep shalom kind of wholeness and peace that is offered to somebody who really manages their conflicts well and manages their life well. And the price, whatever that price may be, is usually, if you're a high accommodating person, that price is usually a part of your soul gets taken away. I know that sounds harsh. I know that sounds a little bit abrupt, but really, I have talked with individuals who spend a good share of their lives just people pleasing and accommodating, and they will be really clear with me that, boy, it just feels like each time they pleased or tried to please people who don't like them anyway, who won't show up at their funeral, that a part of their lives, part of their souls were actually taken. Accommodating is good when you are or were wrong about something. And accommodating is also good when you care more about the person than you do about the issue. Let me tease this out just a little bit by offering to you all some teaching, some basic teaching as found in the scriptures on the subject of humility. I have counted at least 4 times. I think this theme is repeated, but the subject of humility is found all the way through the scriptures. But at least 4 times I've counted where there is this statement. It's repeated this way. Sometimes a little different verbiage, but it's usually repeated this way, and that is, God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Being translated means in conflict, in relationships, in life. If I'm willing to take ownership and say, I was wrong on this one, or simply coming to the conclusion that life isn't about me, which I think is a mark of humility when you come to that conclusion, life seems to go better. God seems to grace you and me more. Here's where I draw the distinction. There are some individuals, and perhaps you're one of them, who has equated humility with humiliation. Meaning, if I choose to be vulnerable, if I choose to take ownership, if I choose to be honest about something, I'll get throttled for that. Somebody will take advantage of that. And you know what, folks? That might be true. There may be some history attached to that. You may have been involved in a relationship, maybe in family of origin. Any measure of responsibility or vulnerability got exploited. I don't know. All I can tell you is, at least as we work through some of this stuff, that there's something really incredibly powerful with just saying, I think I'm wrong on this, or I'm not right. You were right. I shouldn't have said this to you. I shouldn't have done this. And also, accommodating really is good when you just care about the person. I'm amazed at the stuff that people fight about, to be honest with you. How a marriage can get derailed because of the remote control or where you go for dinner, or gee, I could give you guys a list of the stupid stuff that people have fought about when in essence they are turning on each other, and the issue just sits there and doesn't get addressed. So you care more about the person than you do about the issue. Accommodating is not good when it happens a lot. And here's how you would know. For instance, if you're involved regularly in some sort of difficult conversations, difficult relationship, and each and perhaps every time you walk away saying, darn, I really had some pretty good things to say, but the people pleasing won, or I couldn't live with the tension anymore, so I just took it for the team. Accommodating is not good, folks, when it happens a lot and you just wish you would have had more of a voice. And there may be some of you who say, okay, Rota, that's fine. That's easy for you. I mean, good night. You're a mediator. You know how this rolls. You don't know my history. You don't know my story. You don't know my wiring. You're right. I don't. But a part of this journey that we're on, at least in regards to the styles, is, do I want to keep living this way? Do I want to keep walking away from each difficult conversation and kind of beating myself up saying, I know I had some good things to say here. Why didn't I say them? Well, here's my challenge to you. Figure out, why didn't you say them? Why didn't you just give voice to some things that are true to your heart, true to your convictions, if you would, and you just chose to kind of wimp out and not say them? At least look at that part, okay? Avoiding, though, you might say, I'd rather not deal with this now. Truth be told, there are a lot of times when you don't deal with it at all. So there's nothing wrong and everything right at times if, the octane level is high in a relationship, or there's just a lot of anger going on and there's some stuff going on in this conflict that just isn't very pleasant. There's nothing wrong and everything right with saying, I don't want to deal with this right now. The trouble is that if your default is avoiding, you eventually don't get around to dealing with it. So the now becomes like forever. I'd rather not deal with this now, being translated as, I probably won't ever deal with it because I simply avoid conflict. And you withdraw. Your perspective on conflict is that it's all hopeless. So I guess I'll just accept the fact that we're going to disagree, and I'm going to bail from this. Here's the problem with this, among many things, is all conflict is not hopeless. As you will hear from a number of mediators like myself, in the hands of a good God, actually, there is some conflict, not all of it, but there's some conflict that can teach you and me some really, really good stuff about our lives and about our God and about our world. It just will. So I don't sign on to this belief that all conflict is hopeless, so I'm just going to disagree and bail. So please keep your eye on that. I don't think it's all bad to be an avoider, or to avoid. There are times, come on, stuff's on the table, you think, really? Do I want to invest a half a day or in half of my lifetime arguing about this? So yeah, there's stuff you really don't care much about, and that's fine. Also, avoiding is really good when you or someone else is very angry and you just need some time to regroup. The operative word there is regrouping, because by definition it means you're kind of gathering up your resources to come back in with that conflict, whatever it might be. But I think we've all been in situations where clearly there's some chaos and some weirdness going on around us, where the last thing we want to do or should do is get in there and mix it up and just maybe even get hurt. Avoiding is also good when you're in a dangerous situation and you just don't need to be there. You realize, wait a minute, I'm at the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't need to be here. The world isn't going to change for the better or worse because I'm here, so I'm out of here. I'm going to avoid this situation. Avoiding's not good. When in the quietness of your own spirit, you just rarely deal with the conflicts in your life. And you guys, this takes a certain level of honesty. This takes a certain level of openness with your own spirit, saying, hey, as I look back in the conflicts in my life, I don't think I've dealt with very many of them. I think I've kind of hoped that they would go away. Well, here to tell you they don't. Some do, but they don't go away. And avoiding is not good when, again, you really do care about a particular issue, but you're just afraid. You're afraid to speak up. You're afraid that people will disagree with you, which they will. You're afraid that somebody may marginalize you or criticize you because of your view on this particular. You know what? They might. But that's not a reason to regularly avoid the conflicts in your life. I want to tell you a little bit of backdrop for this matter called forcing. Sometimes it's called controlling. Sometimes, well, it's called a lot of things, but let me just tell you this story. A number of years ago, I had a student, after I had talked about this particular matter of forcing. She came up to me at the end of the class, and she was weeping. And, when she stopped crying and was able to give some voice to her concerns of her heart, she explained to me that she really, really did love this person that she was dating. In fact, it had reached a point in their relationship where he wasn't sure he wanted to stay in this relationship, though he really loved her. He was just really tired of being on the receiving end of her controlling and needing to win, and her harsh words and all the stuff that sometimes attaches itself to forcing. And I can't be a student's therapist. I just can't. It's against my ethical code. But I did empower her with some good resources to say, let me just encourage you to deal with this. This seems to be, in the grand scheme of things, the time for you to own this particular part of your life, to deal with it aggressively. If you want to deal with it through therapy, let me make this referral, yada yada, all that stuff. Well, she did, and what was interesting is a number of years following that exchange, I was preaching in a church, and I looked out there and I noticed my student, and she was sitting with what was now her husband and the father of her children. And just after the class, after the church service, I said, well, so how you doing? She says, I am so thankful I dealt with that because it really was time for me to stop controlling and to be humble about the reality that and she used the word, I'm a forcer. And I said, well, okay, I'm not going to diagnose you at that. But if you're willing to say, there was a time in my life where I needed to win and it was my way or the highway, or even in some cases, God is on my side, not yours. She never played that card, but I've seen and heard that card played a number of times. God's on my side. So anyway, she dealt with it, and I don't know how that lands with you guys, but if you need to win, if somewhere in your schema you're thinking through stuff, it's a near-death experience to lose or to be humble, please look at that. Description is, I need to control the outcome. You kind of insist on your view of prevailing. I'm not calling you weird. I'm saying this is weird when somebody almost takes bring it on. The more conflict, the better. I'm thinking, really? I mean, as a mediator and as one who has helped people fight fear for years, I still think conflict sucks at times. So to bring it on, come on, it's obvious. There's not something right about that. And speaking of right, there's within a forcing mentality or a default, there's this belief, this perspective that says some people are right and some people are wrong, and guess who's right and guess who else is wrong. It's good, again, when something needs to be cited quickly. It's also good when you know you're right, which, come on, are you right all the time? And I can't hear you, but you're probably saying, well, yeah, I am. Rotuck, come on. You're probably not. My wife has done some fascinating research on the limbic system of the brain and how you send yourself messages saying, I think I'm right here, and I'll be danged if anybody can prove me wrong on this. When in essence, here's a news flash. You might actually not be the rightest you've ever been in your life. Forcing's not good when you use it often with people you care about, like my student who just said, I love this guy. I so love this guy. But I'm tired of bludgeoning him with my words and my controlling. And also, here's just another little sidebar. If you are regularly hearing from people, they're telling you, Dan, I'd love to be able to discuss something with you, but I've noticed that you don't listen. I've noticed that I'm almost fearful of even saying anything to you for fear that you're going to go off or you're going to quote scripture to prove that I'm wrong, or whatever the issue might be. But forcing is not good when you want people to feel they can discuss and disagree with you. Anyway, think this stuff through. And again, when Paul wrote to young Timothy and said, pay close attention to yourself, maybe now is the time through this little instrument to say, wow, I got a little bit of work to do here. I'm going to pay attention to the ways that I fight. I'm going to pay attention to not just conflict style, but I'm going to pay attention to the way people around me respond and react when I disagree with them or when they disagree with me. This is all part of this growing curve that we're on, you guys, to be, quite frankly, more and more conformed to the image of Jesus Christ. Bless you. Thanks for listening.